My parents' homes was spared narrowly, but it was spared. The rest of the town, of course, was not nearly as lucky. But we spent that whole night without power, just in the dark. And in the moments leading up to it, we watched reports from the local meteorologists, and we could just see it. You could hear it in their voices, and you could see it in their faces, in their eyes. These guys were legitimately frightened. I'd never seen meteorologists behave that way. I'd seen them, they're always all business when they report forecasts of what's coming. But on that night, there was definite fear in what they were saying. Like they pointed out this, I distinctly remember this. One of them pointed at this splotch on the map. It was this big blue glob, and he said, that's the tornado. That's how big this thing was. It was big enough that it was showing up on their radar as it chewed up the landscape. And so they were, they were just all but begging people, take cover, uh, put on, take shelter, take cover, be safe. This thing is dangerous. This thing is really, really bad, and it's going to be really rough when it passes over you. And at some point, when the signal went out, and I distinctly remember hearing this sound, like it was like an engine almost. It sounded like a cross between like a generator and a car and a train somewhere in the distance. And I'd heard that tornadoes sound like freight trains, and I wondered if that's what I was hearing. And in hindsight, I think maybe it was. I think I was the sound I heard was this tornado leveling the community that I grew up in. And about 10, 15 minutes later was when we started hearing from people again. There was no internet because the power was out, Wi-Fi was down, and the cellular service was extremely limited. It's as I record this, it's still spotty down there in a lot of places. But we started seeing photos come in through social media of what was happening, and I saw the courthouse, the entire roof and like a clock tower were just gone. And I remember thinking, like, I went to that building every day for 8 years while I worked at the newspaper there in Mayfield. I mean, that was my day. I went there and I would see the county judge executive, the chief of police, the uh, sheriff, the mayor. They'd often be just gathered together, just shooting the breeze, and yes, eating donuts. And I would check in with them every day to see what the news was going to be for the day. What arrest reports happened, what the city had going on. That was my day, and it was always there. And when I grew up, that building was always there. But now a third of it is missing. The city hall was trashed. Um, four churches were damaged. Three of them were gone. Only one of them really survived, and I think the main reason it survived is because the other churches took the hit. And these are churches that even non-Christians in the city feel their loss because some of them are as old, if not older, than the town itself. So this unbelievable amount of community history was just wiped out. The closest I can relate it to, even though it's kind of might be hyperbolic, would be like the Notre Dame chapel when it caught fire. All the historians were just heartbroken over it because of all the history that was lost. And on a community level, that's kind of what happened here. These buildings, people attended church there. They'd been attending church there for almost 200 years, and they're gone. The church, my parents' church, First United Methodist. That's the church where I was baptized. I grew up there. I learned all about Christianity through that church. And then I was for my wedding reception. My wife and I, we had the wedding in her church, which was right next door, and then we came across the street to my parents' church, my home church, where I grew up, and we had my wedding reception there. But it's gone, and I distinctly remember the first word I had on that was sitting there in the dark, and my parents got a phone call from their neighbor who had just been downtown, and she told them, and they had this on speaker, and I just heard these words: "Our church is gone." And it was stark and it was haunting to hear that. And it still puts a weird feeling in me saying that out loud because that building was a fixture in my life. Every time I went home, oftentimes, you have to, divvy up the visitation between both sets of parents since they both lived in the same town. But every other time we visited, we'd go to my parents' church. We'd still go there, and it was one of those churches with a pipe organ built into the wall. The whole back wall of the sanctuary was the pipe organ, and in the pictures that I saw, the pipe organ was exposed. It was like the pipes were like outside. You could see them from the street, and it's not supposed to be that way.